the same level of trust in Boris Johnson. The dispatches programme saw negotiators sitting down with pharmaceutical companies from the US negotiating. Trump back in June made it quite clear the NHS was on the table for the negotiations. We know also some statements that have gone on in terms of US negotiators. Exactly as has been said, it is up for sale under them.
But in that same dispatches programme, the former General Counsel for the Office of the US Trade Representative, there's a title for you, confirmed that pharmaceuticals would not have to be on the table in trade deals. He said if the UK really is determined to make no changes at all on pharmaceuticals, they can absolutely hold that position. That doesn't have anything to do with us. That's up to y'all.
Yeah, that means Boris Johnson, in his relationship with Donald Trump, will roll over, and as far as I'm concerned,
But you've also got organisations, respected organisations like the Centre for European Reform think tank. They've said that public services would be carved out of trade deals. It's not normal to include them. The Centre for Economic Policy Research said it would be very strange for a trade agreement to require a privatisation of a public service.
Some of these bodies are hardly independent. They have their own political agendas. However, it is a matter of trust. It is a matter of trust. And I'm sorry, the combination of Donald Trump and Boris Johnson does not inspire confidence or trust in me and many others that the NHS will be safe. And when it comes down to any trade deals, we know what Trump is about. It's America first. And I think we'll be ripped off.
But surely for a British Prime Minister, it's Britain first. And a British Prime Minister is under no obligation to sign a trade deal that he thinks or she thinks is wrong for the United Kingdom.
Why were the negotiations taking place? Why were the talks taking place with the pharmaceutical companies?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I haven't seen the programme. I mean,
watch the programme and you'll see that there's been several meetings, discussions with US pharmaceutical companies about their relationship with the NHS. And that means, as far as we're concerned...
But what's wrong with that? Why shouldn't there be? Because presumably a lot of the drugs that we import at the moment are made by US pharmaceutical companies.
Because it is quite clear those negotiations are taking place and the US companies will have one objective, to maximise their profits within the NHS itself. And we believe it's the foot in the door for the further
it could be that the negotiations were all about the pricing of drugs, because obviously we think we're being ripped off by a lot of these companies.
I think it's more than that. I think there's an agenda there, and Trump made it clear. He might have pulled back now, but Trump made it clear in June NHS was on the table.
What do you say to Chris Hobson from NHS Providers, who said that political parties should not use the NHS as a political weapon in election campaigns? He said over-dramatising NHS difficulties or making disingenuous funding claims did the service no favours. That's what you're doing.
No, not at all. Fully agreed with him. Absolutely agreed with him. So therefore what we've done, whatever we've published, they're basically figures published by the House of Commons Library and by the NHS itself. So when we said there's been 80,000 cancellations of operations, that figure came from the NHS via the House of Commons Library. All of the figures that we published on this, all of them have been verified either by the House of Commons Library or by NHS or independent bodies. And therefore, pointing out the facts is not weaponising the NHS. It's actually saying this is the reality of it.
But scaring people that the Conservatives want to privatise the NHS is weaponising the NHS, isn't it? And you know you know as well as I do that only 7% of the NHS is under private contract.
10 billion has been put out to contracts.
7%.
10 billion.
7% of the NHS.
10 billion is a lot of money.
And that was 4% in 1997. It went up to 6% under Tony Blair, and it's gone up to 7% under the Conservatives.
£10 billion worth of contracts going out there.
But what have you got against the private sector being involved in healthcare?
It means basically that some of that money will not just be paying for the service, it will actually also be providing a profit to those companies that will then be paid out in dividends to shareholders. That money should be used solely for the treatment of patients.
What is wrong with the word profit?
When it's public money which should be spent on patients, it shouldn't be spent on profit.
But there's lots of... I mean, would you want to nationalise all of our pharmacies, for example? Well, they provide a very good service. They presumably make a profit.
What we want to do is to make sure services are in-house. So we're not...
Including pharmacy?
Well, I believe actually pharmaceutical provision should be in-house. But at the same time, what we're trying to say to people, we'll manage those contracts when we take over in government. When those contracts run out, we'll protect the patients and we'll bring them in-house at this public provision.
Even if there is proof that the private sector is doing a really good job?
Well, what will happen is that we'll assess every contract. But the reality is this: when you have a private contractor, you are paying out for that contractor to make a profit, and therefore that money that's paid out in profits is not being spent on patient care.
Well, that may be so, but what if it is more expensive to provide that service within the NHS?
Actually, we believe insourcing is more effective because you can
It might be in some ways, but it might not be in others. Whereas you're saying that you want to bring everything back in.
You're integrating the service into a democratic control overall. You're not wasting resources on profits that will go into private shareholders' pockets. Simple as that. Every penny that we pay for the NHS should be spent on patient care.
So dentistry, for example. I mean, the majority of people see private dentists because the NHS hasn't provided a universal dentistry service for people. Would you want to nationalise all dentist practices?
At the moment, dentistry is organised as it is. A major reorganisation wouldn't prove effective. There are some reforms that we want to undertake to make sure there's better access, but we're talking about the core services of the NHS. And at the moment, £10 billion going out there. Quite a significant amount of it going in profits is a waste of resources.
GP services. I mean, GPs are effectively private sector companies, and they contract their services to the NHS.
Yeah, but they're not private companies. They're not profiteering. They're actually trying to ensure that
some of the salaries that they pay themselves. You might say they are.
The services are provided by NHS.
No, but they are actually they're not. Well, run in the same sense that hospitals are run by the NHS. GPs are not.
They're within the NHS.
Let me look at some quotes that I've got here from previous general election campaigns where successive Labour politicians in virtually every election campaign in history have said that Tony Blair, 1997, there are 14 days to save the NHS. You've got here 12 days to save the NHS, 24 hours to save the NHS, 6 months to save our NHS. This is weaponising the NHS.
In 97. Hang on, let me defend Tony Blair.
Well, I think we've got our newsline from this interview, John.
Are you sitting comfortably? Let me defend Tony Blair.
The floor is yours. The floor is yours as long as you like.
I tell you, during that... I was a candidate in 97. That's when I got elected. And our NHS was in crisis at the time. We had waiting lists, case after case I was dealing with, of putative constituents who'd been waiting long periods of time for operations, who were in pain and suffering. And as a result of, I think, extensive cuts in the NHS and an element of privatisation, yes, under the Tories, we were in a situation where the NHS was in a deep crisis. After 9 years of a Conservative government, we're back in that crisis again. That's not weaponising the NHS. That's giving an accurate description. I met with doctors, nurses and paramedics on Monday, and we asked them to tell us what it was like on the front line. This was the words of doctors, nurses and paramedics. It is shocking. And they themselves now are saying we could be facing the worst winter crisis that we've seen for years. Now, that's not weaponising the NHS. That's telling it as it is.